Couture garments can take extra time and care and attention and thought, but I think you'll find these are the garments you turn to again and again and again. Hello, I'm Susan Khalje. I'm a couture dressmaker, and I also teach sewing classes online and in person, and I write sewing books, and I'm an editor of a sewing magazine. Well, nothing is more central, pardon the no pun intended, to the success of either a pair of pants or a skirt than a nicely constructed waistband. Well, I'd like to show you a little bit about what goes on inside that and ways that you can make this treatment comfortable and sturdy. Well, there's a lot of tension around the waist. The garment pulls, we move, we shift, we bend, we stretch. There's a lot of heat around that area. So you need something inside other than the fashion fabric to keep things just as you want them to be. Well, my favorite is the old-fashioned grosgrain ribbon, sometimes called Petersham, sometimes called milliner's grosgrain. It comes in different strengths, different thicknesses, different widths, of course. 1 inch wide is about what we want for our waistband. The first thing you have to do is a bit of stay stitching right along the stitching line. This is right at the waistline. And of course, if you had a lining in here, you would stitch the lining in there as well when you do this row of stay stitching. So regular size stitch, 2.5. Well, then you've got to put the grosgrain in place, and you can hand base that if you like, just to guarantee its placement. But I don't think it's very difficult to line it up and sew along. Now you can see I've used a slightly bigger stitch when I sew it. Keeps things a little bit more flexible in there. So that's pretty straightforward. Then of course you have to sew the waistband. Now in this case, I want the waistband to really be all the way around. I want a full thickness here at the front because I don't want to see an indentation. If the waistband started halfway down, I might see a ridge when I fold this back, and I don't want that. So 1, 2, 3, 4 inches is about the width of my waistband, and you can always add a little bit for turn of the cloth, that extra fabric you need when the fabric folds around. So that's been sewn in place. And if it's easier, you can always sew it from the other side. That way you can really nail the placement. Well, then the waistband has to be pressed up in preparation for the folding. And you can see I've run it all the way down back here too. So again, no ridge where the fabric stops halfway. So once things are folded in place, of course, you've got to finish off the edges. You've got other things to do here. But I like to sew this with a fell stitch. You could stitch in the ditch, I suppose, but I like to use the fell stitch, one of the most useful of the hand sewing stitches. So you'll see I'm here on my side of the fold. The needle goes right over, and I'm being careful to hide it within all those layers. You don't want to see it on the other side, of course, but there are plenty of layers to hide this in. So it almost comes out at a very slight diagonal. So now I'm at the base again, and I simply go back in. It's a quick stitch, it's a sturdy stitch. I think it's fun to do, and it's a very nice, clean way to finish off your waistband. All right, well, let's take a look at a couple of waistband orientations, and they're different depending on whether your garment closes at the center back or at the side. Well, let's look at a center back opening first. So here's the zipper, hand-picked zipper in a couture garment, and you can see if you were getting into this garment, well, let's say you're right-handed, you'd be hooking with your right hand, so that's the edge that you want to have flush. You don't want to see a tab on the top, you want the tab to be underneath. So we have a flush edge here, and of course the grosgrain has been trimmed to that point. On the underlap, the grosgrain extends, and you can see the hooks are sewn on really pretty securely, and I'm going to show you just how to do that in a little bit. So the hooks are on nice and tight, and you can see there's a covered snap here. For some reason, couture garments have an aversion to seeing metal, so we go to great lengths to cover up the metal in garments. So a covered snap, it's just covered with a little piece of the lining. So 2 little thread bars, again, certainly you can use the metal part of these eyes, but you can also make them out of thread. They're pretty sturdy. It's just a couple of pieces of thread that are gone over again with buttonhole stitch. So That orientation is what you have at the center back. Well, it's slightly different on the side, and if you think of how you would fasten a garment, it makes sense. So here you are at the front of your garment, again, with your right hand, and this, of course, would be the opposite if you were left-handed. But let's say you're right-handed. You would hook this with your right hand, and again, we have those little thread bars and the snap, which keeps the placket in place. Well, that's the waistband. So now let's talk a little bit about hanging loops. You do have to hang your garment. Well, I take no credit for this technique at all. This is something we used to do when I worked at a couture house in New York back in the day. So you've got hanging loops on your skirt. Certainly, sometimes you can clamp the fabric, but that does sometimes leave indentations, so not always a great idea. This is very clever. Wouldn't it make sense to hang your garment from an engineering point of view from 4 points instead of just 2? That way you don't get the little ears that you get on the sides of a garment. So I've got these little hanging loops. But what's really clever about this technique is that when you wear the garment, the hanging loops aren't visible. They're right against your waistline, and there's no way they can be seen. So it's much better than getting fed up with them and cutting them off, in which case they don't do you any good at all, do they? And this is simply a little tube on grain of the lining fabric, and it's just tucked into these edges. And it's about, I'd say 2.5, 3 inches on either side of that side seam. Of course, you have to make it strong enough, or rather long enough, so that when you lift them up, you clear your hanger. You don't want it to be too short. But other than that, I think a very clever technique and a beautiful way of couture combining form and function. Well, I'd like to show you how to adhere these findings that are so much a part of these garments. Well, there's a very quick way to make this very, very secure and I think very beautiful. Well, I've used a thicker thread here. It's actually a special thread. It's a top stitching thread, but you can use regular thread and you can coat it with beeswax if you like. That makes things a little bit stronger. And you can see I've started sewing this snap on. So I'm going to go to the next hole here, just coming in from behind. And this is where you sew this as you normally would. Just sew it through as usual. But now, instead of pulling it all the way through, I think of always spearing that loop. I'm going to come up from underneath, spear it, and then pull it tight. Now pull it a little bit slowly so it doesn't snarl, because you know if you pull it tight it will snarl. And pull it and orient it so that that bead of thread is resting right between the base of the snap and your fabric. So let's do another one. I think 2 per side are enough, certainly with this strong thread. And now I'm going to just go around here and finish this off. And even if you've covered your snap with a piece of the lining, and you do that by basically making a little yo-yo and then sort of securing the fabric in the back, even if you've done that, this is a good technique. So again, all you have to do is spear that little loop, pull your threads down so they're really snug at the base, and I'll do a final one, and there you have it. Trust me, I don't think that's ever going to go anywhere. I had to take one of these off the other day, and it took some doing. So let me just show you again how that looked working its way around. You can do it around the base of a traditional hook as well, and a few extra stitches here up at the top. So secure to wear, secure to fasten. It'll last a long time. Enjoy.